All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us to another episode, another fireside chat. Today with me, I have Dr. Bill Schindler. You're an archaeologist and a chef. That's a very interesting combination. And you have, as far as I've seen and heard, a very interesting take on human nutrition, because you bring a nuance to the discussion that is not solely related or solely focused on what you should be eating. Should you be eating meat or plants or something in between? But really talk about the aspect of how we should be preparing food to make it compatible with our physiology and to make it as nutrient dense as possible. And maybe what foods we should be avoiding, because there is no good way of turning them into something that's good for us, right? And we met at KetoCon conference a couple of weeks ago, and I heard just the end of your talk where you explained how food impacted human evolution. What were some of the milestones that allowed us to evolve into what we are today? And you gave a couple of good examples of how certain animals process foods in their body to make them more nutritious for them and to make them, or to enable them to absorb the nutrients in that food, because without those processing methods that we can replicate using kitchen tools or some of the other things that we're going to talk about in this video, we can make those foods also compatible with our physiology. So it's not only about just removing entire food categories and never touching them at all. It's about learning how you can process those foods. And by process, I mean, don't go and buy processed, potato chips, but by doing things to the food in your own kitchen to make them compatible with, our body, and without having or dealing with some of the negative side effects of just eating certain unprocessed foods or raw foods, right? And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you. Tell us a little bit about how you got where you are. Why are you a chef and an archaeologist? What is your background? And what you've learned, over the years visiting tribes and just, watching different tribes around the world do certain things with their food and how they thrive doing that.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. And it was great to meet you at KetoCon. And what a fantastic conference that was. I met so many amazing people. So my background is varied. And what I love, I've always been interested in food my entire life. In fact, I almost left school and went to culinary school in the middle of college. And I'm glad I didn't, because going through school and then getting my master's and PhD in archaeology and anthropology allowed me to then go and explore the food world through a completely different set of eyes than most people in kitchens do. And I'm sitting here before you, and what I'm going to talk about today is a product of a whole bunch of different experiences. I started with an incredibly unhealthy relationship with food for my entire life. I was overweight, suffering from all sorts of metabolic disease. Eventually, I became a Division I athlete at Ohio State. I wrestled. I traded one unhealthy relationship with food for a completely different one. And then after I was done competing, all the weight poured back on, and I suffered, as many people listening to this can probably relate to, for a long period of time. And I spent all of that time trying to figure out what I should be eating. My parents hired nutritionists. My coaches hired nutritionists. I was around some brilliant people in the nutrition world, and nothing ever made sense. And I couldn't heal myself, and I couldn't get my weight under control, and I couldn't get my body self-image under control. And I tried every single diet on the planet that you can imagine. And it wasn't until, and I was able to put together my lifelong passion and training in archaeology and anthropology and ancestral foodways and ancestral technologies. I was able to put that together with modern day approaches to food, that I was able to heal myself and raise my family in an incredibly nourishing way. And now we're doing it more on a commercial scale. We have a nonprofit called the Eastern Shore Food Lab, which is my wife and I, which is where we do all of our research and teaching and outreach. And we also have a place called the Modern Stone Age Kitchen, which is where we actually put all of this into practice and create nourishing food for the community. So it can be done. It can be done in your house. It can be done on a larger scale, like we're doing here. But what I think is the light bulb for me, the switch that allowed me to actually see food for what it is, especially in terms of the human relationship with food, is that I realized that humans have a completely different way of eating than any other animal on the planet. One thing I like to say to start this off, and I think what's going to happen here, and what usually happens is I'm going to say a couple of things here that are going to sound out of control and off the wall. And then when I explain it through looking at archaeology and evolution, it's going to make a lot more sense. And I'm going to be able to hopefully bring it back home and make it applicable to people. We know that humans are omnivores. Humans can eat plants. Humans can eat dairy. Humans can eat meat, right? We can eat insects. We can eat all of these things. We are omnivores. But what we have to understand is we are not omnivores by design. Our bodies are not designed to access resources from all of those categories and process them in the safest and most nourishing way possible without assistance. We are not omnivores by design. We are omnivores by technology. We require technology to access these foods properly, and we require technology to make them as safe and nourishing as possible. That's one of the many differences that we have compared to other animals in the world and their diets. They are animals, and listen, when I say animals, I mean wild animals. The same things that I'm talking about with humans go for domesticated animals. We are screwing up domesticated animals as much as we're screwing up our own species by feeding them foods that they're not designed to eat and all this. But take us and our cats and our dogs and our pigs and our chickens and things out of the equation. Wild animals are perfectly designed biologically and physiologically and mentally, all of it, to consume certain foods. Right? We know this. We know that cows and ruminant animals are specifically designed to access the nutrients in tough vegetable materials, things like grass. If I ate a whole bunch of grass, I'd fill my belly, it'd be distended, and I would die of starvation because I can't break through those cell walls. But ruminant animals have several things going for them, including a rumen, a fermentation chamber in their stomach. We mentioned it, we'll dive into it a little bit deeper, but granivorous birds that are designed to eat grains have certain things in their anatomy and their digestive tracts that allow them to detoxify those grains and properly prepare them so they can safely access the nutrients in them. We don't have those sorts of things. Humans must create, and we have been for millions of years, create technologies to access nutrients from our environment and then do something to them to make them safe and nourishing. The other thing, that seed I would like to plant very quickly, and then we'll explore it further, is that the weird part of this discussion is that even though we are not physically designed to safely and efficiently access the nutrients in most of the foods that we eat, we require the nutrients from those foods. And I know that's kind of hard to wrap our brains around, but think about it this way. And let's talk about domestication very quickly. If we want to understand what domestication means and why it relates to humans, let's define what domestication means. And this is both for plants and animals. A good definition, one that I like, is that to domesticate something, you take that animal or plant out of its natural wild environment and you put it in a human, culturally created environment and tend to it. You protect it, you fence it in, you make sure it has access to sunlight, you make sure you feed it certain foods, and you do all these things to it. You trim it, you reduce competition, you do all these sorts of things. And over time, because of the cultural inputs we put into it, the human environment that we put it in, those plants or animals genetically change over time into something different. And in many cases, they genetically change into something that can no longer survive in the wild without all those extra inputs getting put in. So if that's the definition we're going to go with, a lot of questions I get asked all the time are, okay, what was the first domesticated plant and what was the first domesticated animal? Well, the first domesticated plant, there's a huge debate right now. It very, very well may be maize, believe it or not. It might not be Fertile Crescent grains. It actually might be maize. It might be potatoes. But regardless, it's something like that. It probably was around 10 to 12,000 years ago. As far as domesticated animals go, even though most of the domesticated animals domestication of these animals took place around 7, 8, 9,000 years ago, the dog is very early. Dog domestication is probably closer to 35,000 years ago, which is super cool, and there's a whole discussion on itself. And usually the answers to those kinds of questions about domestication stop there. But if you go to that definition that I gave, you've taken a wild animal, put it in a culturally created environment where there's inputs that are not natural, there's something going on there, and because of this cultural environment, that species has changed and changed and changed and changed, eventually to the point where it can no longer survive on its own in the wild. The answer to that question is us. We domesticated ourselves 3.5 million years ago, and we created our first technologies. We started down that road, and it was a simple stone tool. This, one strike of a rock, to the right kind of rock that broke off a razor sharp edge that was sharper and more durable than anything on our ancestors' bodies, that allowed them to scavenge and butcher animals on the African savanna, unlocked a whole bunch of nutrition that we couldn't access earlier than that. And the more technologies we created, things like hunting technology and fire technology and fermentation and nixtamalization and a whole host of these technologies, allowed our ancestors to gain more access to resources that they couldn't access with their nails or their teeth or whatever they had on their muscles, and then take those foods and make them safe and nourishing for our own digestive tracts. And because they did that, and did that so well over time, we responded. It supported massive body growth. It supported massive brain growth. And both of those things are nutrient expensive. And we now, both you and I and everybody listening to this, are existing in bodies that we cannot support without some sort of technological and cultural input to get us our food. And one thing I like to say is, I don't care if you're as good a survivalist as Bear Grylls or anybody else out there who knew every plant that was safe to eat or whatever, and I stripped you down naked and threw you in the woods, you would starve to death. There is no possible way of you nourishing your body to the point where you would be able to survive, and definitely not to the point where you'd be able to reproduce viable offspring and continue your species without some sort of technological input. So I know you mentioned this earlier, what do we eat? Important. And I'd love to dive deep into some of that and look at the archaeological record to help answer that question. But more importantly, or at least equally as important as what we eat, is how we eat. How do we take that raw material from our environment and process it to make it as safe and nourishing as possible? And after all, that's what it's really all about. Right. Food processing in the past was focused on creating foods that are safe, nutrient dense, and bioavailable. And I do want to make that distinction. Food processing today is usually for other purposes, like profit or shelf life or shipping or whatever, at the expense of safety, nutrient density, and bioavailability.
Okay, let me ask you this, and I know there's a risk of people taking that as a context, but you said we are omnivores because of necessity. But by design, what are we?
Oh, but we're omnivores, not by necessity. Well, maybe you could say necessity, but I said technology. We are omnivores through technology. Right. So that's a good question. So what are we? It's not really an easy answer, because there's a couple ways to answer that. One is, let's look at our pre-technological ancestors and see what they were eating. In other words, what they were eating using, just like any other wild animal, using only their nails and their muscles and their eyes and their teeth and what speed or lack of speed, what were they eating? Well, the best that we can tell is that they were herbivores, frugivores, and insectivores. So that means they were eating plants, they were eating fruits, and they were eating insects. Now, if we're using sort of our modern idea of grocery stores as kind of a correlate to that, or to try to wrap our brains around what that means, it's a completely different thing. First off, all plants have toxins. So, and plants were not put on this earth to nourish humans or any other animal, right? Mm-hmm. They're engaged in chemical warfare to survive and do their thing and reproduce. So, and this is especially the case with wild plants. So it's not that they walked into the woods and had this like salad bar looking at them, right? So there are only select plants that they could safely and in a nourishing way access without any technology whatsoever. They had no method of detoxification. So number one, that reduces a whole bunch of the plants that are there to a very small amount. Plus, there's no form of transportation. There's no hoop houses or greenhouses, right? So they're forced to eat hyper-seasonal and hyperlocal. So again, all of a sudden, what kind of plants they could access from their environment is incredibly restrictive. Insects, just like animals today, are in most cases are available all year round. And insects were the most nutrient dense, safe, bioavailable parts of their diet. So they were insectivores with some plants, kind of mixed in.
And around what time was that?
That was from about, we like to start the conversation at about somewhere between 5 and 7 million years ago, which is when our ancestors first stood up. And then that lasted till about 3.5 million years ago. So for a very long period of time. But you got to remember, they were small and they had small brains. So the nutritional requirements could be met through those activities and through those foods. So the next major milestone, and they didn't go from that to hunting and gathering. And I know, since my head is buried in prehistory, I maybe break this down more than most people have time for, but it is an important distinction, what I'm going to say here. They didn't go from, and that's gathering. So they're gathering plants, gathering insects. They didn't go from that to hunter-gatherer. There was an important step in between. At about 3.5 million years ago, when they created their first stone tool, their sharp edge. And this isn't like this gorgeous, multi-flake knife. It was literally just a flake that got knocked off. But it was the first time that they could overcome their own physical limitations and do something that, they didn't need their own biology for, right? They could do amazing things. So what they did at this time is they became scavenger gatherers, right? They weren't hunting. They have no evidence of hunting at 3.5 million years ago, but we have evidence of these stone tools, and we have evidence of butchering. And what they were doing is that they were butchering animals that other predators had taken down on the savannah. So at that time, we didn't have lions, we didn't have hyenas, we didn't have buzzards. We had their ancestors, right? We're talking millions of years ago, and their ancestors were nastier than they are. You have these nasty predators on the savannah, and this is what we think was happening. The nasty, I'm just going to say lions, even though it's their ancestors, but the lions would take down their prey and do the same thing then probably as they do now. They don't take down their prey and just start, eating the muscle off the shoulders. Predators typically will take down their prey, rip it apart, dive right into the inside, and gorge themselves on the blood, the fat, and the organs. The blood, the fat, and the organs are the most nutrient-dense, bioavailable parts of that animal. In other words, their bodies do not have to work hard to digest the nutrition, the massive amount of nutrition that's in the blood, the fat, and the organs. So they go in there, they gorge themselves, and then typically will go off and sleep and digest that meal. When they leave that, when they do that, they leave a carcass, often a huge carcass covered in meat right there on the savannah. So that's the time that the buzzards, or ancestors to buzzards and hyenas, come in, and they're perfectly designed to scavenge. They have the right pH in their digestive tract. They have claws, they have canines, they have all that, and they get in there and they start ripping off and shredding pieces of meat and doing their thing. But our ancestors, standing 3.5 feet tall with minimal amount of strength and nails very similar to ours and teeth very similar to ours, are sitting there watching like, I can't do anything. There's 300 pounds of meat sitting out there and I can't do a thing about it. But when they struck that flake off, they all of a sudden they had a razor sharp butchering knife. And they ran down there and they started hacking off pieces of meat. They started cutting it up and shredding it up, bringing it back to camp, sharing it with the elderly and the young and anybody who was sick. And that's great. So we know meat was introduced into our diet because of not only those tools, but the marks found on the bones of animals made by those tools at about, the first butchering evidence is 3.4 million years ago, and the first evidence for the tools 3.3, give or take. So we introduce meat, and also the other thing we do see is we can tell there are some long bones that are getting intentionally busted open for marrow. So we introduce meat and a little bit of marrow into our diets at about 3.5 million years ago. The funny thing is that there isn't much anatomical change because of the introduction of meat into our diet. Our brains don't grow that much bigger. Our bodies don't grow that much bigger. But the next major change that happens is at 2 million years ago. So for about 1.5 million years, our ancestors are scavenging, and it's hard. I mean, you can only imagine how fragmentary the archaeological record is from 3.5 million years ago.
Right.
So we don't know how often this is. We know it's happening. We don't know if it's happening daily. We don't know if it's happening every 6 months. We have no idea if the influx of meat into the diet is at any meaningful level. But what we do know is that they are eating meat, and there isn't much anatomical response to that. But at 2 million years ago, we see the biggest jump in brain size, the biggest jump in body size. And the difference there is that they start hunting. So, at about 5 million years ago, we're scavengers. We're gatherers. At 3.5 million years ago, we're scavenger gatherers. And then at about 2 million years ago, we become hunter gatherers. Huge jump in brain size, huge jump in body size. And there's 2 technological innovations at 2 million years ago that I think are responsible for this. Number one is we're hunting, which means we're the predators. We have first access to those animals, which means the blood, the fat, and the organs, which weren't available to their ancestors, are now a part of our diet. The most nutrient-dense, bioavailable parts of those animals we can now consume. The second thing is we start cooking. And cooking allows us to do a whole bunch of things, including detoxifying foods, unlocking nutrients. Now, I know anybody who looks at cookbooks and does a lot of cooking and looks at people talking about nutrition and cooking, sometimes cooking can reduce the nutrients in food, right? So if you take something and boil the heck out of it and throw away the water, you know, a lot of the nutrients are in the water. That's true. But there are certain foods, when you cook them, you allow the foods to break down at some level that our bodies can't do. So cooking does allow us to increase nutrients, increase safety, and increase bioavailability sometimes in the right applications. Regardless, those things are happening in our ancestors. You know, their size of their brains and the size of their bodies skyrocketed. And from that point forward, you know, what we see for a long period of time is just them figuring out how to do what they do even better. Right? They're better. They become better hunters. They become better trappers. They become better fishers. They become better fermenters, and all the things that they're doing, they get better and better and better at. And then at about 12,000 years ago, we hit, you know, the agricultural revolution, and we go from dozens of different animals, and the entire animal in our diets, and hundreds of different plants, to diets that are based in most cases on 1 or 2 main plants. And depending, you know, if you're in Southeast Asia, it's rice. If you're in Fertile Crescent, it's some kind of grain like wheat or whatever. If you're in the Americas, it's maize or potatoes. So, you know, that is a complete difference. And we see, and obviously we're seeing the effects of that now. So with the difference from 2 million years ago to the agricultural revolution at about 10 or 12,000 years ago is we went from hunter-gatherers to food producers. We're no longer, I mean, we are, but you know, the main way that we're getting our food is not by getting it from the environment through hunting and gathering, it's by farming. And when we farm, again, it's mostly based on 1 or 2 staple crops, and it's almost always based on annual grains. And then the next major transition that I usually talk about is the Industrial Revolution, where most people go from food producers to food consumers. And at each one of those last 2 steps, several drastically problematic things happen. The safety in our diets plummet. And one of the main reasons is we go from a very animal-based diet that has very little toxins in it to one that is focused on grains, which is full of toxins and phytates and anti-nutrients and all those things. Or even if it's potatoes and it's not grains, it's even worse. The glycoalkaloids. I mean, we can just have that conversation in a minute as well.
Right.
The nutrient density goes down, the bioavailability goes down. And in my mind, one of the huge things we're paying the price for now is that it starts this trend of people getting distanced from their food, where it comes from and how it's prepared. We hear in history class that, oh my gosh, the agricultural revolution is amazing because X, Y, and Z, but it always ends too with this discussion. Oh, well, it frees up certain people from society. They don't have to worry about where their food comes from, so they can become poets and politicians and all these priests or whatever they are. And that's great. It's great that they have time to do that. But every time something like that happens, those people are removed from their food and where it comes from, their knowledge of their food. And then when we become food consumers, most people have no idea where their food is coming from, how it's grown, and more importantly, how we can prepare it. And we're really at the epitome of that right now.
And I think it also leads to entirely unnecessary discussions. Like, I don't know how often I've heard, well, if you eat animals, it's bad for the environment, and eating plants, saves the planet. And I'm like, we have a veggie garden. We don't eat a whole lot of veggies, but the tomatoes that we grow, there are caterpillars on there, and if I want to have tomatoes, I have to kill those caterpillars, and that's only, us in our little garden there. But imagine this on scale, what do you think, all those farmers do that, grow soy and corn and, all of those, staple grains? Do you know how many animals get killed? There is just no way, to grow any food in any way without, killing something or someone, and so, the discussion is completely, in my opinion, irrelevant. It's not about, what is better for animal. Well, animal welfare is important, but it's not about, if you eat this, then no animal is going to die. If you eat that, then a lot of animals are going to die. That's not even, that shouldn't even be a discussion, because there is unfortunately animal death in either case. The question is, how do we go about that, and how we do, and also, let's not forget, there is a certain circle of life, and if we don't kill something else to nourish ourselves, then we're not going to go very far, and
absolutely.
But if you just go to the store and buy your, Beyond Burger, whatever, and think, you're doing something good for the planet, you really have no clue what's happening to make this product, and by just going about, your way and not worrying about, where food really comes from, if you're never exposed to growing food, be it plants or, raising animals, raising livestock, you miss out on so much important information that is, I think, vital for our own health, because without that information, you cannot make a good choice of what you should be eating and how you should preparing your food to make it, most nutritious.
100%. Yeah, I live here on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. I'm in a very rural area, and you can't drive anywhere without passing massive, huge cornfields. And I talk to a lot of people that they come down here and they visit. Oh my gosh, look at the natural beauty, and I love driving down and seeing this beautiful, nature. And that cornfield, there's several problems with that cornfield. I know I'm not telling you anything, but I tell them quite a bit. There's several things wrong with that cornfield. Number one, there's only one thing alive in it, which is it's just the corn.
It's corn.
And I love the way Lierre Keith puts it, and it's true. Farmers, when they plant a monocrop like that, the first typical modern farming is they commit genocide on that piece of land. They kill literally everything. Insect, fungi, bacteria, and any other competing plant that's there, they wipe it clean and it's all dead. And then they plant one thing, and then they have to use a whole bunch of chemicals to make sure that there's nothing else growing there and competing with it. So number one, that's not anything close to being natural. Number two, that maize has gone through 10,000 years of selective pressure and now is being genetically modified with chemicals in labs and test tubes. It was grass. It used to be grass 10,000 years ago. And the third thing that most people don't realize is that it's not human food. Almost every field they're going by when they see all this is going into animals that are not designed to eat that as food.
Right.
So there's 1,000 different things wrong with driving by a cornfield and saying, hey, that's nature. That's a beautiful thing. We need to keep it. I remember the first time I was in Italy. And I know there's places like this in America too. I just hadn't seen them before going to Italy. And I was in Italy, and I remember seeing a huge truck in the middle of a field, and they were loading it. The middle of a field that was the size of a cornfield around here, and they were loading it with tomatoes. And I thought two things. Number one, that's one of the first times I've seen a field of that size filled with human food that's going directly into humans. And my second thought was, how do they do that and not crush all the tomatoes on the bottom? It's so many tomatoes, but regardless, that's a very rare thing. So as we're driving around and we're thinking about, plants and this and that and all that, most of the plants that we see are going into animals and they shouldn't be eating them. And then, there's that whole other discussion. But that connection that you mentioned, and I was talking about earlier, I think is vital. Vital. Reestablishing that connection with our food and seeing it. It's one of the reasons I advocate, and one of the things I think everybody needs to do is get back into the kitchen. The kitchen is not there just to prepare food that looks and tastes good. The real value, and those things are important, don't get me wrong, but the real value of the magic of what we can do in the kitchen is what we have been doing for 3.5 million years. Exactly what helped nourish us to the point where our species, landed on this, or were created, and then and continued to flourish. Take raw materials and turn them into the safest, most nourishing food possible for ourselves and our families. And with that said, in addition to that, I think we should put, and I don't want to get on a soapbox here, but I will for a second because I think it's really important. We need, there are no more, we're so disconnected from our food. There's no wonder that there's this huge debate about whether or not we should be eating animals. We don't bring animals into our house anymore, unless they're cats or dogs or hamsters. We bring pieces of animals into our home. There's no bones, there's no feathers, there's no skin, there's no hair, there's no teeth. None of that is in our kitchens anymore. And we expect our kids to make that link between a chicken and an egg, or a chicken and a chicken breast, or a pig and bacon. It's almost impossible. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I'm very proud that my wife and I have done the entirety that we, been raising our families, is we've been, I do a lot of hunting, so we're bringing in that way, but we bring in whole chickens. We bring in a half a pig, we throw it right on the counter, and whether sometimes the kids are involved, but even if they're sitting there watching TV while it's going on in the background, they hear a knife scrape a bone. They see something, the form of what has come into that house resembles the shape of something that was once living. Mm-hmm. And to me, some people find that disgusting. To me, that's the best way to honor that animal. I mean, I've sat down, and you probably have too, to so many, sit down to dinner somewhere with friends or what have you, and there's a piece of meat, there's something animal related on the table, and then somebody brings up, God forbid, an animal in the discussion, a pig or a cow or whatever. No, I don't want to think about it. I'm eating. I don't want to think about that cow right now. I'm eating a steak. It's the exact wrong. It is the exact wrong thing to do. Yeah. Some of the best conversations I've had around the dinner table, my son and I had shot a deer, and we're sitting there. It could be months later, and we're eating, the family's eating a steak, and we're sitting there. Remember the time we were sitting in that stand, and we saw the deer come, and it was, the sunlight looked like this, and it was running like this, and it was doing these sorts of things. That's a beautiful conversation. That is a connection to food and where it comes from, and remembering that an animal died to nourish our family. There is nothing wrong with that. The opposite, I have a huge issue with.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I totally agree. And I just got my hunting license, and I just picked up my hunting rifle today, actually, from the store.
Congratulations! That's awesome.
So I'm super excited, and taking our little one, showing him the ropes, and taking him hunting, and literally bringing home, some of the food that we eat, instead of just, we buy entire cows and stuff. We typically don't butcher them, but that's a great idea to get half a pig or something, and then do the work, in the kitchen. We have a bunch of chickens in the backyard, and once they stop laying eggs, then we'll then end up in the pot for sure, and we'll do the butchering. We can establish that humans can safely consume animals, their muscle meat, their organs, their fats, their bone marrow, etc. Nose to tail, ideally. I mean, maybe you're not going to eat, everything, but there is a lot of pieces of the animal that you can eat and you should be eating. So it's not just, the fillet or the muscle meat. There is everything else, that's part of that animal that provides distinct nutrients that we need to thrive, and that have allowed us, as I remember correctly, around 2 million years ago, to make that leap from, being small and weak and everything to, bigger brain size, bigger stature overall, and just, kickstarting our species, basically. And so, but what about, some of the plant-based foods that, some argue you absolutely need, others say, you can eat them, but you don't really need them. But realistically, from a, just being a functional part of society, or a member of our modern society, there is nothing wrong with eating certain animals, certain plants, be it fruits, be it vegetables, etc. if you prepare them in a certain way. But there are also maybe some others that you should not be eating because there is no good way of preparing them, of making them
Absolutely
nutritious and removing the toxins that all plants contain. That's, I think, one of the statements you've made before, and that I've said in the past. All plants have toxins to various degrees. So there are some that have more, some that have less. And there are ways to mitigate those, right? With preparation. And so what are some of the plants that you can safely eat? And what are the preparation methods? And what are some of the plants that we don't have a good preparation method for, that you should, better not eat and leave for someone else?
Or something else, yeah.
Or something else, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's start off with this sort of 30,000 foot view. If we look at the technologies that our ancestors created to include animals in our diets, and the technologies that our ancestors used to include plants in our diets, there's a very big distinction between the two. And this is up until the agricultural revolution, up until that point. So forget everything since from that point forward. Almost every technology that was created about animals were to get them, right? To overcome our physical limitations and shoot them out of the sky or trap them or whatever, to get the animal. Once you have that animal, you just need a sharp edge. You don't even need fire. You don't need anything but a sharp edge and a rock, and you can get all the nutrition out of that animal, just about all of it. There is a little bit of there's some research that suggests a little bit of cooking of red meat helps release, make available to our human bodies a little bit more of the nutrition. But for the most part, we don't have to detoxify anything on those animals. The nutrition is available to us. It's all about getting the animals. But plants are completely different. The stuff we need to get plants, it's a digging stick, a sharp edge, a rock to crack open nuts. I mean, that's literally about it. Almost all the technologies our ancestors created, all the technological innovation forever, were about how to get around the plant defense mechanisms, the chemicals, right, to detoxify the plants, and then to take, even though plants do have nutrition, it's locked up. It's difficult for our bodies to access that nutrition without help. So all the technologies almost surrounding plants were to make them safe and to get the nutrients in the state that our bodies could actually do something. And with animals, it's about how to get the animal and then you're set. The other big distinction, and I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, is that plants are seasonal. You only have access to certain plants, certain times of the year, and animals are not. You can have access to animals all year round, no matter where you live in the world. So those are very huge distinctions. So let's set that. So I do believe, especially if you embrace a complete nose to tail approach to animals, right? You're eating the entire thing, and just spend 2 seconds on that before we jump to plants. The biggest leap in our evolutionary dietary past in body and brain size was when we started hunting and could consume the entire animal. Most of us who eat meat today eat select cuts of meat every time we eat animals, and only from a couple animals. I mean, I know people who only eat chicken breast from a chicken, and that's the only meat that they eat, right? There's nothing about that bears any resemblance to the way our ancestors ate or ate, or the diets that actually built us as a species, right? And if you want to talk about and get back to, and I'm not going to dive into it, but if you want to get back to that discussion about, the attack on animals in our diets and ethics and sustainability and all that, I am convinced that the most nourishing, ethical, and sustainable way to include animals in our diets is to engage in a complete nose to tail approach. And it hits all the buttons. I mean, it's fantastic. And I'd love to talk more about that in a minute, but that aside, we can get everything we need if we eat the entire animal and tick off all those other cultural boxes. But plants are a little bit different. I am convinced that if it's possible to get everything we need from plants, it requires a massive input. not only a massive amount of work, a massive amount of technology, a massive amount of fossil fuels, a massive amount of shipping all over the world to get different things from different places to one spot, to your apartment in New York City or whatever it is. Right. I'm not convinced it's possible, but if it is possible, I'm convinced it is the most wasteful, ridiculous way of trying to nourish your body. Now, that said, we humans eat for a lot of different reasons. And true nourishment is more than just biological nourishment. We have to not only nourish our bodies, but we have to nourish our souls. We have to meet or exceed cultural expectations of food. We have religious expectations, all sorts of different things. There's a lot of different boxes that we need to check to get up from the table and truly be fully nourished. And it's not just the biological piece. So there are a lot of different reasons and good reasons that people want to eat plants or include plants in their diets. Some of them taste good. Some of them, again, are there's certain cultural things, or the family's always eating this at this time of the year, or I just like the taste of it, whatever, the texture, all of it makes complete sense. Right. So the question then is, how do we include plants in our diets in the safest and most nourishing way possible? So I don't have the answer for all the different foods. In fact, it's one of the things I've been looking at plant toxins and traditional ways of detoxifying plants for a little bit over 20 years. And it's a fascinating rabbit hole to dive down. I do have a couple of good takeaways, but I want to just paint a really quick picture that I think people can use to better understand that human-plant relationship and toxins and all this. Remember, plants are on the planet to do the same thing every other living thing is, to be here, to thrive, and to reproduce viable offspring. And if a species, plant or animal, fails to reproduce viable offspring, they go extinct. And it's happened a lot in the past. The estimation is 99% of all the species that ever lived on this planet have become extinct. So at some point it breaks down. But animals do it to protect themselves and protect their offspring until they reach childbearing age, and then they can reproduce in a lot of different ways. But plants, since they don't move, do it primarily through chemical warfare. That's exactly what they do. Understand that anything that a plant does beyond just the basic survival things that it does is energetically taxing. It takes work for a plant to produce a toxin or to produce something. So there's usually a very good reason for it to be there. Now, they produce these things called allelochemicals, which allow them to allow them to interact with the outside world. In many cases, it repels things. It repels fungus, or it repels a predator, or repels insects, or whatever. In some cases, they produce these allelochemicals that attract when they need it. And if you think about the life cycle of a plant, and it paints, I think, a really clear picture of where those toxins are most dangerous. This isn't 100%, and I would never want to say, anything in the plant or foraging world, or even the shopping world, as being 100% this or 100% that. But for the most part, if you think about it, a plant, when it's growing, doesn't want to get eaten. Like, it just doesn't want to get eaten. So typically you're going to find toxins in that plant. Toxins are often found in the root, especially for perennial type plants, because during the winter, all the energy, everything about that plant gets stored in the roots. We're talking about roots and corms and tubers and those sorts of things. And it does everything it can to protect that. And then when the spring comes, it shoots up new life again. So typically, roots, corms, tubers are very toxic. And the most toxic part of those are often the skin, because that's the barrier between the fungus and the insects and any predator disease and the important part. Shoots and stems and leaves can have various amount of toxins depending on the year and depending on different things. But then the flower comes. Flowers are typically not toxic. The role of a flower is to look beautiful, to smell good, and sometimes even to taste good, and it's going to attract pollinators. So typically flowers don't have a lot of toxins in them, or any, depending on the plant. Then a fruit comes, and in the fruit, the progeny, right, the plant's babies are being formed. The seeds are forming inside of that fruit. The seeds, they don't want the babies to get eaten, and they certainly don't want anything to eat it too early. But the role of the fruit is just like the flower is to attract, right? It's supposed to look good, it's supposed to smell good, and it's supposed to taste delicious. Because the idea is when the seeds are ready, it attracts an animal, usually a mammal, but attracts an animal. The animal eats it. Well, not only a mammal, but the animal eats it. The seeds are designed physically and chemically to withstand the digestive tract of those animals, right? It actually, if you think about a watermelon seed or a grain, it looks like a teardrop. It's physically designed to pass right through and not get hung up in the digestive tract. And it chemically is defended by all sorts of lectins and other sorts of things, so that it gets deposited in a pile of manure somewhere else, and then it can sprout and create new life.
Right.
Seeds, nuts, legumes, and grains are toxic. They are unprocessed. They are toxic. They are the plant's babies. And there's a lot of work being done to protect them until they're in the right environment to support new life. Fruits, ripe fruits, are generally not toxic because that's the job, right? That's the role. Right. But unripe fruits can be toxic. And a great example here, my favorite fruit on the planet is a plant called is a fruit from the American persimmon tree. It grows around here. It's native. It's been around here forever. That fruit, when it's ripe, is delicious. I mean, it is literally my favorite fruit on the planet. If you eat it when it's immature, you will taste it for 7 or 8 hours. It's astringent. It'll suck all the water out of your mouth. It is absolutely horrid, and it makes complete sense. I mean, it's a defense mechanism because there's no reason to eat that fruit before the seeds are ripe and ready to go. So this is in general what we have with the plants. Now, then here we are, humans, trying to eat the seeds, the nuts, the legumes, and the grains safely, and trying to derive nutrition from something that nature, through millions of years, have chemically and physically protected from getting any sort of nutrition out of. And the way there are different ways of doing it, but just to show you the dangers of some of these, a red kidney bean, a raw red kidney bean are so toxic that eating 3 of them will land you in the hospital. In the hospital, people have died from eating raw red kidney beans. And you need to, in this case of beans, they need to be soaked and they need to be cooked in order to detoxify them to the point where they're even close to being safe. A couple of takeaways, right? So roots, corms, tubers, generally toxic. Potatoes, originally the potatoes when they were first domesticated, the wild ancestor of potatoes, incredibly toxic, like will kill you toxic. We hear in the history books or in history class about by the time Columbus made it to the New World, there was in the Americas there were over between 300 and 500 different types of potatoes under domestication, which is perfectly true. But almost every one of them would have made you very sick unless you went through some sort of processing in order to make them safe to eat. Potatoes are full of all sorts of toxins, including glycoalkaloids. And just a quick takeaway with potatoes, a couple of quick things. I know there are a lot of people that eat potatoes. The potatoes in the grocery store today are not as toxic as these early ancestors were, but they still have all those toxins in them. Every potato should be peeled. You should, I don't eat the potato skins. Don't peel them and think, oh, I need to do a zero waste thing here. Compost them, sure, but don't use those skins. Remember them, and it doesn't matter. I grew up, hearing everywhere doctors, oh, eat the potato skins. That's where all the nutrients are. First of all, that's not true, but there are nutrients in it. Those nutrients are not worth it. It is not worth the dangers of eating those skins, especially if you eat a lot of potatoes. Secondly, potatoes should be stored in a cool, dry, dark place. If they're improperly stored, they will start to get, everybody's seen it, that little bit of green tinge on it. If you get it, throw it away. That's chlorophyll, but it's not, it's an indicator of the amount of the toxins that actually built up. And that indicates that they're there and they're worse. Just Google potatoes and people in the hospital. People go to the hospital every year from eating potatoes that have these toxins. Never eat a raw potato. They should always be cooked. But beyond that, one of the things I spent a lot of time down, not a lot, I spent time down with indigenous groups in Bolivia and Peru in this very area where potatoes are first domesticated. The very same groups of people that have formed an incredible relationship with potatoes over thousands of years to see how they detoxify potatoes. And there's several different ways. but one of the ways that they detoxify potatoes is through fermentation. So that's one of the things we do at home now. One of the things we do here in the Modern Stone Age kitchen is that we ferment our potatoes before we cook them. And I'm just going to give you a quick example of the power of food processing to make what we consider a junk food into something that's a lot safer. And some people might even consider it a health food. Bear with me. That might be a stretch, but bear with me. So we're talking about the potato chip. Let's talk about the problems with a potato chip. A potato chip, number one, is coming from a food that's toxic. A potato quite often has the skin on it. It hasn't been skinned. There's been no detoxification, and it's fried in some kind of industrial nut or seed oil, which we know is incredibly bad. And then one of the worst things about a potato chip is that the starches in the potato chip, when it hits the hot temperatures of that fat, create something called acrylamides, which we know are cancer-causing compounds. And in fact, there are certain places like California, if you buy a bag of potato chips, it'll tell you, warning, danger, these potato chips have acrylamides and cancer-causing. Now, the acrylamides weren't there to start with. They're actually something we produce by cooking them, right? Starches and hot temperature creates the acrylamides. Well, what we do is we take the potatoes, and you can easily do this in your house. Take the potatoes, peel them first. Peel them, throw them right into water so they don't turn brown. And then slice them into potato chip size, and then put them in a 2.5% brine. In other words, I take the water and the sliced potatoes, take the total weight of that, multiply it by 2.5%. That's how much salt I add to it. Stir it up and ferment it for 3 days. That's it. That's all you got to do, 3 days. Rinse them really well, and then fry them in lard or tallow, really good animal fat. And here's a bunch of differences. Number one, we've peeled them, so those toxins are gone. We've fermented them, which not only got rid of a lot more of the toxins, but it also, the food for the bacteria in the fermentation is the starch. So it could drastically reduce the starch. Then we fry them in high quality animal fat, so we have no industrial nut and seed oils. And then the potato chips that come out have very, very little acrylamides, if any, because there's almost no browning at all. The starches have been eaten up by the bacteria. Your potato chip is going to be crisp and beautiful, but it's going to be light colored, and you've created a completely different food. That's like the how and the what conversation.
Right.
It's not just a potato chip. It's what did you do to that potato to create that chip? Two completely different foods.
Wow. We have to try that, because we don't eat a whole lot of potatoes. Occasionally, we like sweet potatoes, and the kids, in particular. But that's a good idea. I have to try that. I have to tell my wife right after this call. We have to ferment potatoes.
We can, and you can do that with French fries and everything else. The only other thing I would add, and because you mentioned this at the beginning of the question, there's a lot of ways to detoxify plants. It depends on the toxin and depends on the plant. So sometimes it's fermentation. If it's maize, it's a process called nixtamalization, which releases the nutrients and makes them available to our body. Sometimes it's drying, sometimes it's cooking, sometimes it's a combination of different things. And again, I know it's getting complicated, but that's the world we're diving into if you want to safely and in a nourishing way include plants in your diets. However, the one toxin that I have been trying desperately to figure out a way or find a solution that's traditional or ancestral to get rid of in plants that I haven't been able to find are oxalates. And I will tell you, they have been a major part of my life and a problem in my life. And I think for many people, even if you don't know it yet, there's an issue with oxalates in your diets. And if you took them out, you'd see drastic improvements. But the oxalates are one of those toxins in the plant world that you should recognize, understand which plants have them at high levels, and do whatever you can to either avoid those plants or reduce their consumption in your diet. Things like spinach, almonds, Swiss chard, sesame seeds, beets. Those are some of the biggest offenders. But in general, nuts and seeds are often very, very high in oxalates.
Yeah, makes sense. Maybe let's give one more example. Now we are at the top of the hour, but what about wheat or grains in particular, especially in the context of bread? Because I know that many people like bread. I'm from Austria. I like to think have fairly good bread in comparison to what I've seen here in the US.
Yes.
And we typically don't have bread, but then the other day a friend said, "Hey, I made some sourdough bread. Do you want to try it?" And I'm like, "Okay, I don't need bread, but because I like you, I'm gonna try your bread." And it was good. And then I saw your talk, and I'm like, maybe there is something that you could do with the ingredients that go into bread to make this something that you could enjoy, occasionally or even more frequently, depending on, the toxin load that remains in the final product.
So we own part of our business is we own a sourdough bakery. It's a big part of our lives, and I'm glad you brought that up. Real quick, the difference between sourdough bread and commercial bread, almost everything you find in the grocery store, is that commercial bread goes through one fermentation. Commercial yeast that's made in a factory, isolated in a factory and reproduced, is added to flour, water, and salt, which is what bread and usually 20 or 30 other ingredients in the commercial world. Right. Flour, water, and salt is all you need for bread. Commercial yeast is added. There's a yeast fermentation. Yeast eat the sugars or the carbohydrates, produce two things: alcohol and carbon dioxide. The alcohol burns off when you cook it anyhow, but the carbon dioxide is the gas that actually allows the bread to rise and gives it its softness and the tooth feel and all this that you're used to. That's fine. But nothing's been done to those grains to detoxify them or make the nutrients available to our bodies. Literally, those grains are taken off a stalk, put in an incredibly sterile environment, dried, ground up, and here you're sitting there with all those anti-nutrients and fight. All the issues of the grains are still there in the finished product. The sourdough bread, which is how bread has been made for at least 8,000 years until commercial yeast was isolated, actually involves two fermentations. Number one, it's a wild fermentation, which I love, right? So we harness the wild bacteria and yeast that are in the air and on our skin and on the grains. And the bacteria and yeast, the wild bacteria and yeast, both work together to create the bread. The yeast, the wild yeast in sourdough does the same thing that the commercial yeast does. It just spits out carbon dioxide and alcohol. But the bacteria, they're the real workers here. They're taking the fermentation that they produce, takes the grains, transforms them chemically and physically into something that's safer and more nourishing for our bodies. And let me give you a couple examples of the benefits of sourdough bread. Number one, we have tons of customers that come to us and say, "I haven't eaten bread in years because I have this issue with gluten, this issue, and this issue, and I am absolutely fine on your bread." Now, I will say celiac is a different story, although we have had some people that have said that they are celiac that do fine. But for the most part, celiac is a different story. And we also have had some people that have trouble with bread, that have eaten our bread, that it still doesn't agree with them. But by and large, we have tons of customers that say, "Yours is the only bread that we can eat." Number two, anything that we have with wheat in it here goes through the sourdough process. You can make sourdough anything. We make sourdough pasta, sourdough pizza dough, sourdough bread, sourdough cookies, sourdough croissants. We put it all through the same process because it's that important to us. If you're looking at something like if the glycemic index of bread is important to you, the glycemic index, right, the measure of your blood sugar response to the foods that you eat, 0 is nothing and 100 is pure glucose. Anything above 70, I think, is in the high range, or 71, something like that. And anything below 55 is in the low range. Any bread, I don't care if it is Petridge Farm 100% whole wheat or Wonder Bread 100% white, whatever, it doesn't matter. Anything that's just a yeasted bread falls in the high categories, over 70. If you take the same exact ingredients, don't modify them at all, and put it through the sourdough process, it drops it down below 55. Your body treats it more like a vegetable than it does like a grain. And then something that I'm going to sound very ignorant here, but I'm just going to throw it out there because I'm just learning about this myself. But if you take that bread and then put it in the freezer and let it freeze, and then pull it out and use it for toast or sandwiches or whatever, you've actually increased the amount of resistant starch that's in the bread. So that's starch or carbohydrates that's unavailable to your body, but acts as a food, as a prebiotic for the probiotic. So it may be the case that frozen sourdough bread is even healthier than just regular. But regardless, it's that process. So when people say humans shouldn't be eating bread, I said, well, listen, the bread you're thinking of, the Wonder Bread in the grocery store, and the bread that we make here are two completely different foods. It's actually a shame they have the same name because it's incredibly confusing that way.
Right.
And here's the, I know we're wrapping up, but just very quickly, I can tell a very similar story about dairy or cheese or literally almost anything in our diets. I can tell a very similar story about that. The foods that we're eating today and something with the same name that's made in a very traditional way are two completely different foods. And listen, you may not reach your target weight or live your best life only if you change the bread that you're eating. It's not that big of a, the bread itself might not be a huge deal, but in every part of our diet, there is something that we can be doing to our food to make it safer and more nourishing. And those little things compound over and over and over again. And if we go in one direction, we have the modern issues. And if we go in the other direction, I think we can achieve incredible health and include more things in our diets than we believe we can actually include.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And, I always, give the analogy of, if you have if you consider your body, a glass, and, the more bad things you do in it compounds, it's not only the diet, obviously, it's poor sleep, it's poor stress management, it's environmental toxin, endocrine disruptors, and then the list goes on, all of those compound and, you suffer the consequences. So it's not that, that one thing, I should be exercising more and then I'm going to be fine. No, this is only one piece of the puzzle, and you need to really look at the entire picture and try to shift the narrative, try to go in a different direction in all of those categories. And it starts with every single food that you eat. If you can make the choice between raw milk and pasteurized, homogenized milk, go with the raw. It's not the same product as a denatured, milk from the grocery store that have only a fraction of the nutrients and damaged proteins and no enzymes and no harmful bacteria and nothing. It's the same name, it looks the same, it might taste similar, but it's not the same product. And I think that's a very good point. I mean, we could keep talking for hours. There's a lot of great information. Thank you so much for spending the time. And also want to point out the book. I'm not done reading it yet, but just what I've read so far, it's just amazing. And it's one of those books I'm like, I wish I had picked, I don't know when it was published actually, but I wish I had picked it up many, many years ago, just to get a, big picture kind of idea of where I need to go, instead of trying to fight those, little battles, just think about what have our ancestors done, what tools have they used, how they have prepared food, what have they eaten, why is, a modern version of that food not the same as, the ancient version. And a ton of good information. And so I really, highly recommend it. You can find it anywhere they sell books, I'm sure. Beyond that, where can people find you? Where are you active? Are you on social media? Do you have a newsletter, a webpage? Where can people find you?
So we have several ways to find us. One is we're all over social media at Dr. Bill Schindler, so Dr. Bill Schindler, and also at Modern Stone Age Kitchen. And then websites, eatlikeahuman.com and modernstoneagekitchen.com. And listen, I think the best way, and if you go to modernstoneagekitchen.com, please sign up for our newsletter. We put a newsletter out, we put an email out every Monday that's chock full of all sorts of information and updates and those sorts of things. One of the things we pride ourselves on, my family and I, is our objective, our goal, our mission is to teach people how to nourish themselves and their families. And even though we have a business that's creating food that we believe in, what we really want to do is provide people with the tools to be able to do it in their own kitchens. And I truly believe getting into your kitchen and doing the things we talked about earlier, fermenting, nixtamalizing, butchering, whatever, is the best way to do that. And we offer a ton of classes in person and online, virtual live and pre-recorded on how to make just about any food that you want to learn how to make from scratch. So please visit us there and take a look. And also that book is chock full of recipes as well as background information.
Do you by any chance, do you have like a butchering class, like a on-site kind of thing? You do? I have to sign up for that because I really want to. That's one of the things I'm like on my bucket list. Right now we only have chickens and bees, and next year we're going to add rabbits. But at some point I want to have cattle, like in bigger livestock, and I want to be able to process, those animals myself instead of getting them to an USDA approved butcher where they would not give me the organs, because they have to be thrown away for some stupid reason.
We have whole weekend butchering classes.
Awesome. I'm going to look that up. Cool. Awesome. Well, with that, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Bill, for spending the time. I know we ran a little bit over, but it was a lot of good information. Really appreciate it. I'm going to send you a link as soon as the recording is live. Probably give me 2 or 3 weeks because my editor is a little bit behind on all of the videos I've recorded lately. But once it's live, I'm going to send you a link. I'm going to tag you guys on social and wherever, I'm going to promote the video. And well, let's stay in touch, and I'll see if I can sign up for one of those classes.
Sounds great, man. Thank you so much. It was great to talk with you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.